Thanks for joining us. Pilots and aircraft passengers have confirmed sightings of a large unidentified flying object off the coast of Guernsey. The mysterious shapes were spotted earlier in the week and are described as a long, motionless object that measured up to a mile wide.
Yes, radar screens confirm the presence of the UFOs, and pilot witnesses are now preparing reports for the relevant authorities. Nick Wade has this report.
On Monday afternoon, Captain Ray Bowyer was piloting a routine passenger flight from Southampton to Alderney. But to his and the passengers' surprise, a strange object became visible on the horizon.
You've been a professional pilot for 20 years. You've flown thousands of flights. You're putting your reputation on the line here, so you must truly believe what you saw was very real.
In my years of experience, I've never seen anything like this. And frankly, I'll be perfectly happy not to ever again. It's a pretty chilling thing, and from my first sighting of it, which was initially maybe around 50 miles away, perhaps 40 miles away from the actual object, it appeared to be fairly small, but it must have been pretty huge. It must have been very, very much larger than I thought it was originally. I told air traffic control that they asked me for a size approximately. I said about the size of a 737, perhaps twice the size. But in reflection, seeing this object from about 40 miles away, it must have been very, very much bigger than that. Perhaps maybe a mile across, perhaps.
Were you scared?
I wasn't too happy, put it that way. I was quite glad to get on the ground and have a cup of tea.
So this appeared as a solid object. Using this pad, could you actually draw for me what you saw?
Well, getting close to it, through the binoculars, I could see a sort of a shape very much like this, extremely pointed, very long and thin, and it should be slightly thinner than that, but this area, about 2/3 of the way along the fuselage, was pretty dark. This was very brilliant yellow, very golden yellow, and very dark in this area.
Now what's particularly interesting about this case is that not only did you see it, but your passengers saw it, and indeed radar picked it up. Can you tell me about that?
As I understand it, there was a plot taken on the Jersey radar to be a couple of miles south of the Casquettes Lighthouse, and another aircraft also flying in the vicinity from the Isle of Man into Guernsey, I believe, saw a similar sort of thing.
Would you mind showing us on a chart exactly your course and where you saw these two UFOs?
No problem at all. The position of the first one would have been about here, just south of the Casquettes, which according to radar. And the position of the second one in relation to that one was probably around here somewhere, very close to Guernsey, I would have imagined.
A man with more than 20 years flying experience under his wing, so to speak, saw something extraordinary which later made those headlines as he flew at 4,000 feet near Guernsey. And so did quite a few of his passengers, and so did the pilot of another aircraft that was flying nearby, flying over Sark. And Captain Bowyer is here now to tell his story. Thank you for coming in, and thank you for speaking out, because I know from private conversations I've had over the years with the commercial pilots, sometimes when I'm up in the cockpit with them, they do see things, and they tend not to report them because they don't want to be laughed at or have their careers jeopardised.
Exactly right,
so why have you decided to speak out about this?
Well, I didn't actually decide to speak out at all. Actually, the press asked the company, which I work for, would I mind doing an interview, and the company, being quite a forward-thinking firm, had no objection. In fact, pretty much actively encouraged it. So that's how it happened, really.
Well, how did the press get hold of it then? Did passengers?
I don't know. I really don't know.
You weren't the only person who saw this phenomenon,
that's right.
were you? There were some passengers who saw it, and also another pilot.
Yes.
Simultaneously. Well, look, we've got an artist's impression that we knocked up here this afternoon on our computer paint box. Is that kind of what you saw? Is that a reasonable...
No.
Oh, well, it's the best we did.
Oh, be honest, yeah.
Well, hold that picture.
Well,
you describe it to us.
Well, it was a brilliant yellow object. The brightness you've got there, about 2/3 from left to right, it was a graphite grey section, if you want to call it a fuselage. We don't know yet what it was. We're looking into it.
And how big was it?
Difficult to say once again, but I saw it from 50 miles away. So any object from 50 miles away must have been fairly enormous.
What about a mile long?
It's possible, yeah.
Did it move at all?
It probably didn't move, but I had the great opportunity the other day from Jersey Air Traffic Control visiting their radar room, and some interesting traces, let's put it that way, from the radar
Really?
indicate that there's a possibility that they did pick up on from both Guernsey and Jersey radar traces, spurious traces they call, for around about 55 minutes.
How long did you see it for?
I saw it in total for 12 minutes. These objects, there were 2 of them, through binoculars, 10 times magnification, and in my view, a very definite object inside controlled airspace, which shouldn't have been there.
What happened? Did you simply lose contact with it? Did it disappear?
Well, I was landing. There was a general flight from Southampton going to Alderney, and the only reason I lost sight of it was because I descended through a haze layer, which is fairly common in that area. And having descended through the haze layer, couldn't see it anymore. But it's almost certainly still there.
Did the other pilot who was flying over Sark, the island of Sark, did he report it in exactly the same terms?
Yes, because it was sighted, or they were sighted inside controlled airspace. The pilot's under a legal obligation, and I suspect this is where the press
stories come from.
And he's filed a report exactly the same as I have.
Well, let's show you a couple of pictures from the UFO file books. These are genuine UFOs in the sense that no one's ever been able to explain what they are, but they happen. They're not fakes.
Well, that's
over New Mexico.
That's very similar to the sort of thing that I saw. Yeah,
well,
and my passengers.
That was famously
I haven't seen
taken over New Mexico in 1957, and it's not a cloud. That much we do know. I don't know what it is, but it's not a cloud.
Not a cloud. Analysis showed that it wasn't a cloud, but they don't know what it was, hence UFO. If you had to take an instinctive guess, and I'm saying it's guess, so I'm not asking for professionals, because how could you possibly know? Would you say that it was something of this planet or something from outer space?
Extremely difficult. I mean, I think a few years ago you interviewed Dr. David Clark on a very similar sort of thing.
Did, yeah.
About 4 years ago. I spoke to him today. He's in charge of a team that's looking into this at the moment. I have been asked a question by the press, and my simple answer was, I don't think it's from around here. I can't speculate any further than that. But there is some information which is now being looked at, and hopefully better come back one day and give you an answer to this. But at the moment, it's an unknown.
When you fly now, I mean, do you have a sort of slightly heightened awareness of what may be going on around you?
I think, yes, definitely. Yeah, it's not the first object I've seen personally, and I've spoken to a lot of other commercial pilots since this has happened, and they've said on the quiet, come round the corner, I want to tell you about what I saw.
Absolutely, that's.
And I think what's going to happen now, this may have opened the can, and I think what all professional pilots out there ought to be looking at is actually reporting everything they see and actually getting it itemised and written into the CAA, and then perhaps we will find out.
Well, I have to say, the unofficial first-hand accounts I've, as I say, had from professional pilots, many of them with as much experience as you have, and they're not putting me on, are extraordinary. Some things that some guys have seen. Some see nothing in their entire career. We interviewed a British Airways pilot who also came out in the 1960s. He saw a silver disc, didn't he? He picked it up on his radar. It was picked up on ground radar over the Bay of Biscay. Pretty big, and it travelled at immense speed, way faster than the speed of sound, and disappeared under his right wing. And it was a round silver disc, like they're supposed to be. Extraordinary. Thank you very much for coming in and describing it to us. That's fascinating. Thank you.
We're talking visible from what turned out to eventually, we worked out, from just under 60 miles away. So we're talking in the middle of the day, and a very, very brilliant yellow light, which wasn't blinding to look at, but incredibly sparkling, sort of shimmering shape from, like I say, 60 miles away when I first saw it, and called it in, and I was estimating that it was around about 5 to 7 miles away, but it wasn't. It was a lot further, 10 times further, and getting closer and closer and closer to the one object, and then noticing a second object further away from it, exactly the same design, and quite happy to descend and get out of the way of it, actually, because it was looking pretty frightening. But yeah, an interesting day out. Not many days like that. On the radar traces that I've got, there's a yellow dot which comes as a reflection from Guernsey, and a red dot which is a reflection from Jersey, and at all times these red and yellow dots are appearing on these objects that are getting slightly further and further apart from each other at all times. Now, with the curvature of the Earth and the height of Sark, the Jersey head, if it was a ship, wouldn't be able to see a boat in the water from where it is positioned halfway along the north coast of Jersey. It wouldn't be able to see this boat on the surface of the water, but at all times the red reflection to the radar is visible, so that proves to me that it wasn't on the sea surface. Also, the radar tracks go directly over top of Casquet's lighthouse, and not many ships do that. What my worry was when taking off after that flight, the 26
for getting airborne in and going to Southampton. The last time I saw it was literally just off the end of the island between Casquettes and Alderney, and we couldn't see anything from the ground because there was a haze layer at 2,000 feet. I was worried about climbing straight up into it, but it had gone. So, in actual fact, the two radar traces which started there and then separated, one in each direction, the radar traces stopped, or started and then stopped at exactly the same time. So these two machines, whatever, were operating in conjunction with one another. I don't know. Why would anybody like to experiment with a military aircraft in Class A controlled airspace in the middle of the day? Doesn't make any sense. So I would have thought it's someone that doesn't necessarily know the rules. And therefore, as I've said many times, they're probably not from around here. I suspect they're exoplanetary. They're not from this planet, I wouldn't have thought.